This is the J. Scott Outdoors podcast on Western big game hunting and fishing, brought to you by GoHunt.com Insider. Research faster, hunt more. Go to GoHunt.com/insider and join today. I'm your host, Jay Scott, and I live and breathe hunting and fishing, spending half the year in the field experiencing God's creation. I hope you'll enjoy hearing about our adventures. Guys, welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Coues Deer and field judging and scoring Coues Deer. And tomorrow is Friday, December 11th, and across the state of Arizona, the December tags all kick off. And the December tags are known as rut hunts. And I would say that the last 5 days of the December hunts, it's common to see rutting activity. I know that this weekend we're scheduled to have a cold snap come in, and more than anything, I think cooler weather provides for better environment for deer to be active and moving around. I also think moon has something to do with it. It's going to be a dark moon. We're in a dark moon phase right now, so wouldn't be surprised if this weekend the people that have December tags across Arizona are going to have a pretty darn good atmosphere to find some bucks. I wanted to go over, I've had quite a few requests for Coues Deer field judging, and I've had great response to a couple of the other Coues Deer tactics episodes that I've done, and actually you're going to have me alone on this episode. I just figured it was a lot of information that I needed to get out there, and so you're stuck with me, guys, but we're going to go through. I've been working on an article for GoHunt.com for judging Coues Deer, and so we'll just dive into it. And after this episode, if you've listened to it and you have questions, please feel free to email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. I'll do my best to answer your question the best that I could. I recently just got an email from a fellow J. Scott Outdoors podcast listener who is got a December tag in his pocket, and one of the questions that he asked me is he has a December Coues Deer tag. He says, I've been listening to your podcast. It's one of my favorite things to listen to when I'm on the road. I'm leaving to chase Coues Deer for the first time and wondering if you have some idea on what gear to bring. I've got my Outdoorsman's tripod and panhead, Swarovski 8x42s, Swarovski 12x50s, and a Swarovski ATX 95. Would you leave the 8x42s at home and just use the 1250s? One of my buddies has the new SLC 15x56 and said I could use them. Should I swap them out for my 12s, or am I just fine with the 1250s? It's a great question, and I get it a lot. I would say wear the 8-power binoculars around your neck. I would stick with the 12x50 binocular by Swarovski as the mounted binocular that you're going to use on your Outdoorsman's tripod. I do have both the 1250 and the 15x56, and I absolutely love them both. If it is your first time chasing Coues Deer, I think your field of view is going to be better with the 1250s. So I think in this particular case, 1250s, you're going to pick up a few more deer that maybe you wouldn't with the extra 3 power on the 15x56. I think if this gentleman was a way more advanced expert Coues Deer hunter, I think that extra 3 power is pretty sweet at times. When depends on the terrain that I'm hunting. If it's real detailed glassing, the extra 3 power is great. If it's a lot of panning, then I like that wider field of view with the 1250s. And then with his spotting scope, in my mind, the Swarovski 95 millimeter with the 30 to 70 ocular lens with the 95 millimeter objective. I have not looked through a better spotting scope. Originally, I got the ATX and just couldn't get used to the angled eyepiece. I got the angled because I was using it for a lot of digiscoping and ended up switching the ATX out for the STX. The straight angled is ATX and straight is STX, and have had great success digiscoping with the TLS APO adapter made by Swarovski and my Canon SL1 camera body. On the STX, the straight 95 millimeter, there is not a finer spotting scope in my mind than that one that the guy that wrote in the question is asking about. Phenomenal spotting scope. Guys, let's get right to the meat of this article, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. I know a lot of guys that are listeners have emailed that there's a bunch of December tags in your pocket. So go out there and enjoy it. Have a great time. Be patient. Don't expect a lot of rutting activity until after Christmas. Usually the last 5 days, but more specifically the last 2 or 3 days, usually you get quite a bit of rut. If you're hunting in central Arizona units, you may get it around, maybe a little bit right before Christmas. Seems like the further south you go, the later the rut is. So let's get right into it. As a hunter and outfitter, in my mind, there's nothing more fun to hunt than big Coues Deer bucks. Coues Deer can be very exciting animals to hunt because of their wary nature and ghost-like qualities. I've been fortunate to have harvested and been involved with many record book animals, Coues Deer bucks being harvested. My partner Dar Colburn of Colburn and Scott Outfitters and I use two methods to field judge Coues bucks. First is the estimating actual measurements and the estimated shortest points. And if you guys have listened to my elk field judging, I believe it's episode 50 and 51. It's a very similar method there. Hopefully these two methods will help your field judging for the upcoming season. Please review the charts, which we're going to go over here verbally, guys, to get a feel for the numbers. We often use certain size bucks. These numbers are instrumental for quick field judging. One of the things that's helped my field judging, guys, the most is actually measuring with the tape every antler I can get my hands on. The minimum net score in order to qualify for Boone and Crockett record book is 110 for typical bucks and 120 for non-typical. Let's dive right into estimating actual measurements. There are 4 aspects or categories that are important while field judging and trying to determine a Coues buck score. In the order of importance, in my mind, they are point length, main beam, length, mass, and inside spread. Point length, main beam length, mass, and inside spread. The first and most important aspect to look for is point length. In my mind, you have to have long points in order to have a record book buck. Long points are mandatory in order for a buck to reach the record book. The second most important aspect is length of main beams. A buck must have a good main beam in order to score high. Mass is the third most important aspect of a buck score, then the inside spread. You hear a lot of people talk about, oh man, the buck was really wide or the buck was narrow. When you break down the amount of percentage per category, point length, main beam, mass, and inside spread is the very least. I would rather someone say, hey, I've got a buck with very long points and long main beams, and you've perked my interest. That's going to be a pretty good buck. When looking for a buck that would qualify for Boone and Crockett record book, usually one category weakness can drop you below the required trophy book minimum. The inside spread in relation to percentage of total score is the least important aspect of a high-scoring buck. I'm going to walk you through how Dara and I field judge and actually add up actual measurements on a buck. For our example, let's assume we are looking at a buck that's between 110 and 15 inches. While field judging trophy bucks, the first thing that I look for are the number and length of points. I make sure that the buck has at least a G1, which is the eye guard, on each side, a G2, a G3, plus a main beam. Almost all record book bucks have at least 3 points on each side plus the main beam. By our Eastern Brothers count, they would be called 8-pointers. I quickly estimate and add points on each side, G1, which is the eye guard, G2, G3, and a G4 if available, from each side. I always like my score estimates to be low or on the conservative side, and some would argue that I'm too low. I remember a buck last year in Mexico. I had Dean Heitzelman with me, and we were looking at this buck, and I just couldn't get the looks. I mean, I was looking right at him, but I just couldn't get him to be that big. And I told Dar, it was like a 95, maybe 100-inch type buck. And the buck started out, he was probably 800 or 900 yards away, and he turned out he got pretty close to us at one point in time. And, he had quite a bit of mass, and the mass hid the length of the points. And so I don't want to come across as, I field judge these bucks down to the inch, because I very rarely, I very often miss these bucks. But if I did do anything, I probably judge them a little bit on the low side, just because I never want to walk up on something that I think is much bigger than it is, and it's happened. So it's burned me before, and maybe that's why I'm a little bit gun shy. Keep in mind, when you get bucks that have G4s and G5s that are matching lengths, your score will grow dramatically. Back to our example buck, the buck we are judging has a left side, has a 3-inch G1, an 8-inch G2, and a 7-inch G3 for a total of 18 inches of point length on the left side. Now let's assume that the right side matches, so you add the right side and the left side, so now we have 36 inches of total point length. Once I have totaled the point length, I remember that the number 36. The next thing I do is try and judge the main beam length on each side. We're going to go over a table in a minute to get average main beam lengths that I use in my model. For long main beams, they need to go away from the head. So when you're looking at the buck head on or from behind, they need to go away from the head, so paralleling the ears, and go out to the end of the ears and then wrap back towards one another. Typically, main beams that almost touch in the front are a very good sign of long main beams. One thing I will tell you though, when you're looking at a buck head on, if it could be a narrow buck that's just main beams come close together, but if you get a buck that goes away from his head, paralleling his ears, obviously above his ears, and goes out to the tip of their ears and then comes back all the way back in and almost touches, you've got a really good main beam. Also, look for lots of space between the G2 and G3, much like when we're talking about scoring elk, is you want distance between those points. And if you're looking at it and it looks like the G2 and the G3 are very close together, that beam isn't going to be as long as you think it is. A short main beam will not wrap around as much and will have a straight out with not much more curved look to it. Make sure when trying to look for a long wraparound beams that the buck is not narrow in width. Sometimes they can wrap nicely but are narrow and it can be deceiving. I look for main beams on a record book deer to be at least 17 inches. For our example, the buck we are judging has 18-inch main beams on both sides for a total of 36 inches. Next, I add my point length total. So remember, we had 36 inches on my point length total. We have main beams of 36 inches, which is 72 inches. Then I look at the mass of a rack. There are 4 measurements per side that make up the total mass measurements. So you have 8 total, but 4 per side. Again, I have some preset numbers that I plug into my model, and we're going to go over that in the chart. The mass per side generally varies between 11 and 16 inches. On a 3x3 buck or an 8-pointer, the mass is measured in 4 spots on each main beam between the burr of the main beam and the G1, between the G1 and G2, between the G2 and G3, and then the halfway point between the G3 and the tip of the main beam. When you have a 4x4 or a 10-pointer, you take the fourth mass measurement between the G3 and G4. Now, if you were to have a 5x5, you only get 4 mass measurements. So between the G3 and the G4, that would be the furthest out mass measurement you could take. Okay, so for our example, I then add my mass estimate of 13 per side, so 26 inches in with my other two totals. So remember we had 36 and 36. Okay, so that equals 72 plus 26. That is 98 inches. Now, so we have 98 inches, and the next thing we have to do is add up the spread credit. Once I have completed the estimate and addition of points, main beams, and mass, for example, our total is 98 inches so far. Then all I have to do is add the inside spread credit to the number. Inside spread is usually easy to estimate because I use the width of the ears to estimate the inside spread. The tip-to-tip width of a buck's ears can vary a little, but are usually between 15 and 16 inches. Most bucks' racks lie within the ears. So then it's just a matter of estimating how much inside the ears the main beam lies. If it is 1 inch inside the ear on each side, then the spread is probably 13. So you have 15, the ear width is 15, minus 2, an inch on each side. It's a 13-inch inside spread. Keep in mind, Coues bucks are rarely outside their ears. It seems like we always hear guys talking about bucks that are outside their ears. I have seen very few bucks that's main beams lie outside their ear width. I have seen it, but it is rare. So for our example, a 14-inch spread, you take 98 inches, which is points, main beam, and mass, plus 13. Sorry, here I just said a 14-inch spread. It's a 13-inch spread. You've got 98 plus 13. You've got 111 inches gross. Hopefully that example was easy for you guys to follow. There's another way to quickly field judge a buck, and that is one that we use when we're trying to judge the quickest. It also comes up with the net score, the closest to the net score. It's a simple method. We start by estimating the shortest points. Compare each G1 and add the shortest one. Continue for each point measurement. Add the shortest main beam and throw in a number for mass out of the chart and double it, and then add spread. This method gives you a quickest way to estimate the buck's net score. It is very important to add the measurements in the same order every time. I always do points, main beam, mass, then double that number and add the inside spread. Once you do it several times in that order, it'll become habit. If you and your hunting partners use the same method in that order, and it becomes easy to communicate and field judge while glassing a buck together, I can spout out measurements to my hunting partner Dar, and he knows exactly which order we are in, and we can come up with an estimation very, very quickly. Okay, for our example on this, estimating shortest points, let's take our example. G1, 3 inches. G2, 8 inches. G3, 7 inches. That's 18 inches. Okay? Main beam, 18 inches. Mass, 13 inches. So it's 18 plus 13 times 2 is 98 inches. Then add the inside spread of 13, you get 111 inches. Okay guys, I want to go over a couple charts here that are going to help you out, and I'm going to try and list these charts on my website, jscottoutdoors.com. So if you need to print them out, you can. These charts are going to give you kind of average ballpark measurements for certain size bucks. For a 90-inch buck, you're looking at point length of a G1 of 1 inch, G2 of 6 inches, a G3 of 4 inches, which gives you a total point length per side of 11 inches. You've got main beams 15 to 16 inches per side, and mass is 11 to 12 with an inside spread of 12. So that's going to give you a 1 for G1, a 6 for G2, a 4 for G3, a 16 for main beam. Okay, guys, that's going to be a 1 plus a 6 plus a 4 plus a 16 plus a 12 equals 39. So one side equals 39 times 2. That's 78 plus a 12-inch spread. That's a 90-inch buck. A 100-inch buck, points, G1 is 2, G3 is 7. G1 is 2, G2 is 7, G3 is 6, 15 inches. Main beam is going to be 16 to 17 inches with mass 12 to 13 per side with a spread credit of 13. That's going to give you 2 plus 7 plus 6 equals 15 plus 16 plus 12 equals 43 on one side times 2, that's 86, plus a 13-inch spread, that's 99. For a 110-inch buck, you've got 3-inch G1, 8-inch G2, 7-inch G3, for a total of 18 inches of point length, plus main beam of 17, plus mass of 13, a spread of 14. That's going to give you 18 plus 17 plus 13 equals 48 times 2, that's 96 plus 14-inch spread, that's 110. For a 115 to 120 buck, usually you're going to have a 4-inch G1, which is the eye guard, an 8-inch G2, an 8-inch G3, or 20 inches of point length. Plus, usually for a 115 to 120 buck, they're going to have an 18 to 19-inch main beam. Mass is going to be 14 to 15. And your spread, you're looking at probably 14 to 16. So that's a 4 plus an 8 plus an 8 plus a 14 plus an 18 equals 52 times 2, that's 104. Add in the 14-inch spread credit for 118. A 125 plus buck, you're normally going to have a 4-inch G1, 8-inch G2, 8-inch G3 for 20 inches of point length. Main beams, that's when you're getting those long main beams, 18 to 20 inches. Mass, you're getting a heavy buck that's 16 inches, so that's roughly 4 inches per mass measurement per side, and a spread of 16. So the numbers are 4 plus 8 plus 8 plus 19 plus 16 equals 55 for one side times 2. That's 110 plus a 16-inch spread. That's a 126-inch buck. Guys, I want to go over a few random thoughts. I know this is a lot of information, and I appreciate you guys kind of sticking with me here. Point length is the most important aspect of a buck's score. I cannot grind that in enough. You have to have long points for a buck to be a big buck. So when you're glassing these bucks, look for long points. You can have a freak wide buck or a freak heavy buck that, will edge up and score, but consistently long points is everything. Main beam length is the second most important aspect of a buck score. In smaller bucks under 100, main beam actually is the highest percentage of score. So picture if you have little short dinky points, their 15-inch main beam is going to be the highest percentage of the categories. But once you get up into, the 95, 100-inch bucks, point length becomes everything. In order to have a record book buck, look for the magic number of point length of 20 or more. So if you're adding up a buck and on one side he comes up with 20 inches, okay? You start adding up the buck and you're like, okay, he's got a 5-inch G1, he's got a 9-inch G2, so you're at 14, and he's got an 8-inch G3, you're at 22. You're looking at a big buck. G2s are rarely more than 9 inches long. Now, granted, Brady Miller's, were 11 inches, and he scored like 120. And yes, I've seen some 10 and 11-inch G2s, but rarely are they over 9 inches long. Inside spread rarely exceeds 17 inches. Main beams rarely exceed 20 inches. It's very rare for a buck to have over a 20-inch main beam. And honestly pretty dang long as 19-inch main beams. So when you're trying to estimate your score, don't ever throw in 20 inches because that's like as long as you could possibly have for a main beam. Remember this, bucks without eye guards or G1s rarely make 110. A 110 buck, so a record Boone and Crockett record book buck, usually has no weakness. It is important to have long points in order for a buck to score 100 plus inches. If a point or main beam looks short, then it probably is. If a point or main beam has some curve to it, then it's probably longer than you think. If a point or main beam is straight, then it's shorter than what you think it is. You look for main beams that wrap around and come close together in the front, but make sure it's not a narrow buck. Look for the wide buck with wrapping main beams and long points. When you find that, you're going to have a big buck. Narrow bucks usually mean short beams. When the buck is facing broadside, look for lots of space between the points. This means a long main beam. If points look long, make sure that they are not light, antlered, little skinny points. If they are skinny with little mass, then they are probably not as long as you think. So my example before on that buck last year that fooled me, he had tons of mass throughout his whole rack, not only in the areas where you take your circumference measurements, but all the points were heavy, and it kind of hid the length. On the contrary, if you have skinny points that look really long, they might not be as long as you think because of how skinny the rack is. So keep that in mind. If the points carry lots of mass, they will look shorter than they are. Great bucks' antlers will look long and real high off their head. So when I see a 110-inch buck, he looks really big. And then when you get up in the 120, 130, their racks need to look almost ridiculous on their head. If you have to kind of squint and you don't see that big frame, it's probably not a record book deer. Extra points and kickers. Extra points and kickers. One thing about abnormal points is they will boost your score dramatically. If you get a couple extra points, you could get 4 to 6 to 8 to 10, 12 inches of extra. And you go from looking at what you think is a 110-inch buck, all of a sudden he's got 12 inches of extra and he turns out to be 122. So watch those bucks that have extra points. 4x4 bucks, quite honestly, are pretty rare. Most of the bucks are 3x3 with eye guards. When you get 4x4 bucks, they usually score very well. Generally, 110-inch bucks will have pot belly. They'll appear to have a bigger body than the smaller bucks. They'll have that real blocky shoulder and just be a mature looking, and you'll see the mass on their head. You'll see a lot of mass. That's usually an indication of a 110-inch buck. 100-inch bucks tend to look 100-inch plus bucks tend to look big on the hoof from any distance. If you see 100-inch or plus, he's going to look like a big frame. You'll see the length. You'll see the mass starting to form. You'll see those beams. If you're looking even like at a mile away, if you don't get that real big look off the top of their head, it's probably not a 100-inch buck. And also 120-inch bucks, usually everyone that I've seen, they look ridiculous on the hoof. So they just pop off the top of the head and it just looks like a giant rack. Fight the urge to say the buck was outside his ears because it's very, very rare and I hear it all the time. Outside spread usually means nothing means absolutely nothing when it comes to Boone and Crockett's scoring system. Inside spread is the only credit that counts in Boone and Crockett. Here's a few discoveries according to the Boone and Crockett record book. The top 10 typical bucks had an average main beam length of 20 inches. Conversely, 10 bucks just making the minimum of 110 had an average main beam length of 17.68 inch main beams. The top 10 non-typical bucks had an average main beam length of 18 and 5/8. Conversely, 10 bucks just making the minimum of 120 had an average main beam length of 17 and 7/8. So right there you can see that the top 10 non-typicals had 18 and 5/8, and the bottom 10 that just barely made the minimum of 120 had 17 and 6/8. That's only 6/8 inches of difference in spread credit. The top 10 typical bucks had an average inside spread of 15 and 3/8. Conversely, 10 bucks just making the minimum of 110 had an average inside spread of 15 and 1/8. So right there, there's only a 2/8 inch difference between the highest typical bucks and the ones that just barely made Boone and Crockett on the inside spread. The top 10 non-typical bucks had an average inside spread of 14 and 7/8. Conversely, 10 bucks just making the minimum of 120 had an average spread of 14. The widest inside spread recorded in Boone and Crockett is 21 inches. Okay, guys, I wanted to go over real fast some anatomical references for you guys to use when you're judging Coues deer. The front corner of the eye to the tip of the nose is usually 6 to 6.25 inches. The V in the bottom of the ear to the tip of the ear is usually 6 to 6.5 inches. So basically the ear is usually around 6 to 6.5 inches. Ear width when looking at a deer that's relaxed is usually 15 to 16 inches. Ear width to tip when looking at a deer head on when he's alert is usually 14 to 14.5 inches. The top of the ear to the bottom of the ear is 3.25 inches. And the tip of the nose to the back of the neck in a straight line is around 10 inches. I hope these anatomical references will help you out. Guys, I know we covered a lot of ground here, and I just hope that you're able to take in some of this information. I wish you the best out there. We're getting prepared for our Mexico Coues deer hunts in January during the rut, and I know a bunch of you are going down to Mexico. I'm going to be doing a few podcast episodes on traveling in Mexico and some of the do's and don'ts and some of the things to remember when going down there. I just want to thank you guys for listening and making this podcast a success. I appreciate all the support and the emails that I get from you guys, and feel free to send me a picture of a buck Coues deer that you kill this year, either with your bow or with your rifle. And I love getting pictures from successful hunters. I hope some of these tips could be used to help you out. And I love to hear from you. You can email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. And I just appreciate all the support of this podcast. I'd like to thank gohunt.com/insider for their sponsorship of this podcast, as well as deadeyeoutfitters.com. Just know that when you go to deadeyeoutfitters.com and you use the JScott promo code, you get a 10% discount on all purchases. And actually, right now, they're running a holiday promo of 25% off. And if you use the JScott promo code, so you might go on and get a few Christmas gifts and get some items for yourself. Also, when you join the Go Hunt Insider, click on the blue Join Now button, use the JScott promo code, and GoHunt.com will automatically send you a $50 Coues gift card. GoHunt.com Insider has just recently launched their Filtering 2.0 system, which allows you to filter through all the harvest statistics of the western states of the animals that you're going to be hunting. You can search for 350 plus bulls or 300 plus bulls or 180 inch plus bucks, and it will give you all the units that have that potential. As well as any day now, they're going to release probably the most sophisticated draw odds system that is out there. And you're going to be able to filter through not only for trophy quality, but you'll be able to search with number of points and best odds with the number of points you have. So check them out. Use the JScott promo code. Get a $50 Coues gift card. Guys, thanks for your support.